Axial waves versus non-axial waves. Referring to the above still from the animation, we see a sine wave running along the x-axis and a cosine wave along the y-axis, orthogonal to each other. These waves are both traveling at light speed. Hence they are massless, have zero extension and are dimensionless, i.e. they are pure frequencies, not spacetime waves. In the above diagram depicting the Euler unit circle, the frequency waves can be thought of as running along the real and imaginary axes, albeit we have to imagine a real and an imaginary axis for angle appended to the above diagrams, as shown in the stills from the animations. However, if we regard 360 degrees as one for rotation, we can use the radii of the unit circle as surrogates of these appended axes, and just refer to the surrogates to illustrate our points. This is mind-bending stuff, right at the limit of communicability in terms of words, but run with it as best you can. The more intuitive you are, the more you will get it. So, if sines run horizontally along the real axis radius, and cosines run vertically up the imaginary axis radius, what about waves that run along the non-axial radii? Such waves are subject to non-orthogonal phase. Look at the above diagram. Here we see a phase angle of AE degrees. As we shall see in detail later, the waves that run along such a radius are composed of a linear combination of sine and cosine waves, which are thus dependent on each other, rather than being independent, as in the orthogonal case. As we change phase value AE, we increase or decrease the relative contribution of sine or cosine to the relevant linear combination. This is the true ontological basis of Einsteinian relativity, of time and mass dilation, and length contraction as speed through space, or through time, increases. The details of these arguments will become clearer as we go through the mathematics in due course. The interaxial region of non-orthogonal phase is none other than dimensional spacetime. Spacetime is produced thanks to non-orthogonal phase. The axial orthogonal region, by contrast, is dimensionless non-spacetime, i.e. the frequency domain, the singularity. When a black hole singularity is formed from a massive star, non-orthogonal phase is converted into orthogonal phase, i.e. spacetime mass is converted to orthogonal massless light. Electromagnetism relates to orthogonal frequency phase, while gravity relates to non-orthogonal spacetime phase, i.e. to broken electromagnetism. Higgs bosons and the Higgs field concern this breaking of electromagnetism. The strong and weak forces derive from different more complex symmetries that are made possible when we switch from a frequency domain to a spacetime domain. We don't need anything else to explain the universe. All of the forces of existence come from the relationship between electromagnetism and broken electromagnetism due to phase. All scientific forces can be traced back to sine and cosine waves, to odd and even functions, antisymmetric and symmetric functions, fermions, antisymmetric, and bosons, symmetric, to dimensionless orthogonality and dimensional non-orthogonality. Photonic mass. Photons have no rest mass. But what does this really mean? Is it possible that photons actually have a mass, yet a mass that averages to zero? A photon always has energy, hence always has a mass in some sense, if we link mass and energy, as Einstein famously did in E equals mc2. The question is, what is that sense? An observer will never encounter a photon with no energy, i.e. a genuinely massless photon. That's impossible. The dynamic mass of a photon is given by m equals h/c right double angle bracket in terms of wavelength and m equals hf/c2 in terms of frequency. This dynamic mass of a photon varies with its frequency. High-frequency photons have higher mass. A photon's mass is inversely proportional to its wavelength. The smaller the wavelength, the larger the photonic mass. If light has mass, then it should exert a gravitational influence. However, if its mass averages to zero, this will not be the case. It will have no gravitational consequences. Science has proved incapable of explaining what happens to the mass of a collapsed star when all of its mass ends up located in a single point, singularity. In fact, what happens is that it goes from having a net mass greater than zero to a net mass of zero. It's not that the mass has vanished. It's that it is now organized radically differently. In particular, it means that all phase information which is concerned with the non-orthogonal coupling of sines and cosines is removed, and the sines and cosines are thus decoupled, hence are strictly orthogonal to one another. The property of non-orthogonality is associated with net non-zero mass. The property of orthogonality is associated with net zero mass. Orthogonality hides mass and renders it neutral. Science has no clue about this radical reorganization of mass that serves to remove it from any relation to the spacetime world of matter. Science completely fails to understand the organization of mass and how different ways of organizing it lead to radically different outcomes and consequences. Standing waves. A photon is a standing wave. It doesn't have a rest mass since it is never at rest. It does have a dynamic mass, but this always averages to zero relative to spacetime. It has an average dynamic mass of zero, not a true dynamic mass of zero. The reason it has an averaged mass of zero is that the photon is the product of the Euler unit circle, which is a circle whose perfect symmetry between the positive and negative, the real and imaginary, ensures that all outcomes are net zeros. However, they are non-zero if isolated at any specific instant on their trajectory. A net zero is produced as the average across all specific instants. Defining energy. Energy is a purely abstract quantity, introduced into physics as a useful model with which we can shortcut complex calculations. You cannot see or touch energy, yet the word is now so much part of daily conversation that people think of energy as a tangible entity with an existence of its own. In reality, energy is merely part of a set of mathematical relationships that connect together observations of mechanical processes in a simple way. What Bohr's philosophy suggests is that words like electron, photon or atom should be regarded in the same way as useful models that consolidate in our imagination what is actually only a set of mathematical relations connecting observations. Paul Davies. Science cannot define energy. Mathematics can. Energy is exactly what is defined by Euler's formula. Energy is nothing other than sinusoidal waves, which can exist dimensionlessly as orthogonal mental thoughts or dimensionally as non-orthogonal matter. Why would any rational person accept science's non-definition of energy in preference to ontological mathematics' exact definition? Science refuses to provide definitions of the most important things. For example, it has never defined time. It tells you how to measure time with a clock, but it does not define what time actually is. Instrumental definitions based on measurements and measuring instruments are not ontological definitions, i.e., those that tell you what something actually is, those that tell you the exact nature of its existence. And nor are they epistemological definitions, i.e., those that place the entity within a coherent, consistent, complete body of knowledge. Mathematics provides ontological and epistemological definitions. Science provides instrumental definitions. This is a fundamental difference. This means that science will never be able to provide ultimate explanations and answers. Science, it must never be forgotten, is an empirical method, not a rational system of explanation. In fact, science usually rejects explanations, especially rational ones, since these are deemed metaphysical. Science is concerned with how, not why. Science explicitly rejects teleology, which is all about why. Therefore, science cannot be said to be looking for true explanations. It is more concerned with describing processes within models, and then fallaciously calling these descriptions explanations. They are nothing of the kind. Newtonian physics has been formally falsified by Einsteinian physics and also by quantum mechanics, yet useful explanations can nevertheless be generated by Newtonian physics, since our everyday world reflects the domain of applicability of Newtonian physics extremely well, i.e., in most situations Newtonian physics will produce accurate results and predictions. Newtonian explanations can be furnished for all sorts of things, but they are never true explanations, since Newtonian physics is emphatically false. They are explanations reflecting the Newtonian model of reality. This is a good model within a certain range of our experiences, but it is not a true model. Good explanations, based on models, are not true explanations based on reality. Scientists have never grasped this distinction. Scientists are never anything more than modelers, and their models are always ultimately wrong, even though they may provide successful results within specific domains and ranges. Nietzsche said, "Success has always been the greatest liar." This is very much the case with science. All scientific models are lies that are regarded as true. Science tells us zero about true reality. Science always reflects its fallacious philosophy of empiricism and materialism, which is its philosophical model of reality, upon which all of its specific models, specific theories, are based. Every scientific model and explanation would be different if rationalism and idealism were the underlying philosophy rather than empiricism and materialism. Every scientific explanation rejects mind as a causal agent. Imagine how different science would be if it recognized that mind made of photons was the true basis of reality, and that all explanations must start with the mind. Every explanation in science would change. That's how sensitive scientific explanation is to its underlying philosophy. Science is just a large collection of sensory measurements, organized according to provisional quasi-mathematical formulae, which are interpreted via the sensory philosophy of empiricism and materialism. Science's entire method opposes both idealism and rationalism, hence science is a formally irrationalist ideology. Science endorses empiricism, not rationalism. Everything that science does is hostile to ontology and epistemology. Science is an ad hoc undertaking, full of arbitrariness. Science is heuristic. Wikipedia says, a heuristic technique, often called simply a heuristic, is any approach to problem solving, learning, or discovery that employs a practical method not guaranteed to be optimal or perfect, but sufficient for the immediate goals. Science is all about the practical exercise of measuring things and producing patterns. The patterns are then matched to various mathematical formulae. The formulae are then placed within the context of empiricism and materialism, by which they are interpreted and used to provide explanations regarding this model and philosophy of reality. The whole scientific enterprise is provisional. Anything can be falsified at any time by new data, and everything is in permanent need of verification. I.e., nothing is ever definitively proved. An explanation is not an explanation if it can be overturned at any time. It's a belief system, a kind of religion. It's better than standard religion, to be sure, because it has a method and, above all, uses mathematics, which automatically brings it into contact with true reality, which is wholly mathematical. No rationalist could ever take science seriously, but empiricists who don't care about proof and definitive answers, and indeed regard such things as non-scientific, believe that science is the best humanity can do as far as knowledge and answers go. They are happy to doubt their theories. Happy for nothing to ever be properly resolved. They even try to make a virtue of this catastrophic inability to get to the ultimate definitive truth. Mathematics, the quintessential rationalist subject, rejects all of this. All rationalists are drawn to mathematics, all empiricists to science. Thinking types are mathematicians. Sensing types are scientists. Mathematics is about reason and logic. Science is about the senses and has scant regard for reason and logic. These are not part of the scientific method, which revolves around sensory observations and finding real numbered mathematical formulae to make sense of them. It's a disgrace when prominent scientists set up reason foundations and institutions. Science is as opposed to reason as religious faith is. Reason enters science only through mathematics. Remove mathematics from science, and all reason would vanish too. Science would revert to alchemy, astrology and divination, which are its authentic roots. Martin Luther said, "Reason is the devil's whore," meaning that faith is God's bride. Science also says that reason is the devil's whore, with the human senses now becoming God's bride. Mathematics regards religion and science as the devil's whores. Faith and empiricism must be rejected. They are the twin enemies of rationalism. The principle of sufficient reason is the true God, and mathematics is the mind and body of God. All other gods are false gods, and all prophets of non-mathematics are false prophets.